NY1 News. This is New York Tonight.
Tonight, as the city rebuilds, when the FBI got wind of a possible terror threat, was New York City kept out of the loop? We'll bring you the details, and we'll give you a chance to weigh in. Well, the casualties are mounting in Afghanistan as the biggest battle in the war on terror rages on. And in honor of Women's History Month, we begin a week-long salute to the women of Ground Zero. Good evening. I'm Jeff Simmons, sitting in for John Schumo, who is on assignment tonight. Welcome to this live Monday edition of New York Tonight, the city's only nightly newscast dedicated to stories relating to September 11th. Well, topping our news tonight, word today that just 1 month after the terror attacks, a nuclear threat to New York City was kept secret by federal officials. That report has some lawmakers up in arms, but as New York One's Tanya Valle tells us, the current and former mayors are not jumping to conclusions.
New York City faced a nuclear threat a month after the Twin Towers attacks. That's according to Time magazine, which reports federal officials feared terrorists were planning to smuggle a 10-kiloton nuclear weapon into New York City, a bomb capable of killing 100,000 people and sickening 700,000 with radiation. Senior Bush administration officials went on alert, but chose to keep it secret from New York officials, including Mayor Giuliani.
If it's true, then I should have been notified, the New York Police Department should have been notified, and the governor should have been notified, and the state police should have been notified, at a minimum.
Time reports Washington chose not to notify New York because it didn't want to create hysteria in the city. After weeks of investigation, it finally concluded the threat was false. The current mayor says Washington's decision was understandable.
You cannot, every time you get a threat, without exercising some judgment as to the likely validity of that threat, go to the public and say there's a threat. It just doesn't work that way.
But Senator Hillary Clinton wasn't so understanding.
I was not informed, and I'm outraged. If it is true that there were credible threats of some kind of nuclear attack on this city, and the mayor, the police, the FBI, the governor, the officials responsible for protecting us were not told, that is a dereliction of duty.
Time magazine reports the federal government kept the threat a secret out of fear it would create a panic. Even so, many New Yorkers say they should know.
They should have told us so, just so we could keep a little extra awareness.
Anything that impacts upon the lives of New York City citizens should be knowledgeable to all of us, and let the people decide what action they should take.
Since September 11th, the city and state have been pressing the federal government to share more law enforcement information. But whether that information would be passed on to the public is another question. In this case, not even the FBI was told of this possible threat. In Manhattan, Tanya Valle, New York One.
And last week we told you about a controversial documentary shot on September 11th. That's set to air this Sunday on CBS. It's being screened for the press tonight. The special, titled 9/11, is said to contain footage of rescue efforts inside the towers shortly before they collapsed. Some victims' relatives have complained that it will be too painful to endure, and the Bergen County, New Jersey prosecutor has asked CBS to postpone showing the special for another 6 months. But the network plans to go ahead and air it on Sunday, March 10th at 9 o'clock. Robert De Niro narrated the documentary and says the protests surrounding it are unfounded.
I had an impression after reading an article in the papers about it that it was something other than what I saw, and I don't know whether they're against the thing itself and they saw it, or they just, the idea of it is bothering them. I'm not sure.
A CBS spokesman has said the documentary has nothing exploitive or violent, and he said he's heard from families who want it to air. John Schumo, by the way, is at that press screening tonight, and he will have more on what he saw later tonight on New York One. Well, people and businesses affected by the terror attacks are getting an extra 6 months to apply for government aid. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has extended the deadline to apply for state and federal assistance until September 30th. The original deadline was a week from today. FEMA says it is still receiving almost 300 new applications a day, and so far FEMA has provided grants, loans, and counseling to 60,000 people. To apply for assistance, individuals and business owners can call FEMA's toll-free hotline. That number is 1-800-462-9029 between 8 in the morning and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. Well, 3 years in prison is the sentence handed down today for a man who impersonated a firefighter after September 11th. 34-year-old Jerome Brandel was convicted on charges that included scheming to defraud. Prosecutors say Brandel, posing as a volunteer firefighter from Milwaukee, not only stole hundreds of dollars from a Queens woman, but was also given room and board at a city firehouse. Prosecutors say that Brandel was even able to con the fire department out of tickets to baseball games. He's now facing similar charges in Wisconsin, Kentucky, and Nevada. Well, turning overseas now, the biggest battle thus far of the war in Afghanistan has now killed 9 U.S. soldiers. The Pentagon says most of them died when a Chinook helicopter like this one came under enemy fire and was forced to crash land in eastern Afghanistan. Once on the ground, crew members were caught in a gun battle, but it's not clear who died in the crash and who was killed on the ground. Hundreds of Afghan soldiers supported by U.S. forces have been fighting Taliban and al-Qaeda troops since Friday near the city of Gardez, and at least 1 U.S. serviceman was killed and others injured when another helicopter was fired upon. Well, today also the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff expressed his condolences to the families of those lost, but defended the operation itself.
Any thought that they went in there unprepared or didn't know the terrain they were going into is just not true. It's like we said before. Look at the map. This is very difficult terrain to operate in. The enemy is a very determined enemy, willing to die for their cause.
And General Myers says the enemy has, in his words, lots of weapons and they're well dug in. Well, a memorial service for the 343 firefighters killed in the terrorist attacks is being moved to accommodate a larger than expected crowd. The National Fallen Firefighters Foundation announced today that it's going to move its annual memorial service to Washington, D.C. this fall to accommodate an expected crowd of 20,000 people. The event is usually held on the mountaintop campus of the U.S. Fire Academy. The ceremony will honor the 343 firefighters killed in the attacks, as well as 98 other firefighters who also died in the line of duty last year across the nation. It'll be held October 6th in Washington, D.C., and President Bush has been asked to speak. Well, there is much more ahead on New York Tonight. When we return, I'm going to have the latest numbers from the World Trade Center site, and then I'll be joined on set by Sally Regenhart and Dr. Charles Jennings. They're heading to Washington later this week for a hearing looking into the attacks, which will ask why the towers fell. And that and a lot more coming up. Stay with us.
And now back to New York Tonight.
Welcome back. You're looking at a live picture of the epicenter. There has not been much change over the weekend in the numbers available to us from the Office of Emergency Management. The total of missing and dead is still at the same number as last week, 2,830. The number of people declared dead by the medical examiner's office is 747, and of them 177 are members of the uniformed services. The number of death certificates issued without a body is 1,925, which is down by 5 because 5 people were declared dead by the ME. The number of missing is 1,925. And as for the cleanup efforts at the site, more than 1.2 million tons of debris and 175,000 tons of steel have been removed in close to 97 truckloads. Well, a group of widows and parents of those killed in the World Trade Center attacks, along with firefighters from several states, will be in the nation's capital on Wednesday. They want Congress to open an independent investigation into why the Twin Towers collapsed. They say structural vulnerabilities may exist in other skyscrapers and could cause similar disasters in the future. They also want an investigation into evacuation and firefighting techniques, and they'll testify before the House Science Committee on Wednesday at noon. One of the people at that hearing was my next guest, Sally Regenhart, the founder and chairperson of the Skyscraper Safety Campaign, a project of parents and families of firefighters. Her son, probationary firefighter Christian Regenhart, was one of the first to respond to the World Trade Center. Also joining us tonight, Dr. Charles Jennings, Director of Graduate Programs of Fire Safety, Security, and Emergency Management at John Jay College in New York City. They're both going to talk about the hearing on Wednesday. I also want to point out, Sally, as you mentioned, that Dr. Jennings serves on the Skyscraper Committee's advisory board.
Yes, he's one of my professional advisory panel members, and I'm very, very happy to have his expertise on my panel.
First, tell us, what is the Skyscraper campaign?
The Campaign for Skyscraper Safety is a project which is about concerned people who basically have lost a loved one at the World Trade Center, people who are shocked and outraged that in this day and age, in the greatest city in the world and in the greatest country of the world, buildings collapsed as if it were a third world country. We are outraged. We cannot accept this has happened. We want to know why it happened.
And that is why you're going down to Washington. Tell us a little about the hearing on Wednesday. What's in store?
We are very, very happy that Congress is holding a hearing to really review many issues regarding the World Trade Center. You know, the parents and the widows and other people are very deeply concerned. We, as of this date, we have not had an investigation into the causes of the collapse of the World Trade Center. And keep in mind, Congress has had 12 different investigations into the collapse of Enron, but not one investigation into the collapse of the World Trade Center.
I want to bring Dr. Jennings in here. Your colleague Glenn Corbett will be testifying on Wednesday. Tell me why you feel this investigation is necessary.
Well, it's customary, and whenever there's a disaster of any magnitude, there's a full review of what happened in order to gather lessons learned. And that would include gathering information on what happened when, to establish a timeline, to establish definitively what happened in terms of the structure of the building, and determine why the collapse occurred, and so that we can learn from that for the future, so that we can incorporate that into building code changes, and equally importantly, understand what happened in terms of the management of the incident, so that going forward we can develop instructions for people who work in high-rise buildings and help the fire departments cope with emergencies in the future.
At this point, have you come to any conclusions or beliefs of why the towers fell?
Well, I mean, there's a number of theories that are being kicked around out there, but the absolute problem is that there hasn't been a thorough inquiry. The American Society of Civil Engineers have been funded to the tune of about $600,000. Following the Northridge earthquake in California, there were something on the order of $12 million was spent to investigate structural problems, and that totally changed the way that steel frame buildings were constructed. And so what we're seeing in the media tends to be speculation, some of it more educated and informed than others, but basically speculation from structural engineers who have some degree of association with the project. But I've been, as all members of the professional community who were outside this fairly small group, have really not been granted access to the same information that they have. And it's really an open question as to whether that's going to be made public.
Now, this hearing, Sally, was supposed to originally be held, I believe, last week, but that had been postponed. What has it been like trying to gather enough people to go down on Wednesday of this week?
There's a tremendous interest. I think people are really beginning to realize they're coming out of their shock and their grief, and they are really realizing how angry they are and how needlessly their loved one died. You know, these people were the salt of the earth. They were overwhelmingly young people, vital people who are so necessary to the lives of their loved ones. You know, we have been devastated. Our lives have been destroyed by this. We want to know why this happened. We don't want them to die in vain. We want this to be a legacy, to learn from this. And my organization plans to work with building codes groups. We are not going to allow buildings to be built of any size, of any height, where a developer can walk away from it and leave it to the fire service to figure out how to defend it.
From your research, do you believe that the Twin Towers were structurally safe? Do you believe that there were problems with them prior to this?
I'm not really qualified, you know, regarding the structure, but I will say from my research, I'm shocked at the number of stairways that were in the building. I'm shocked that safety measures seem to be the last concern. I'm shocked at the use.
What type of safety
Well,
measures?
I'm shocked that of the lightweight steel open floor truss construction, which in the fire department there's a saying, never trust the truss. Truss construction has historically been deadly to the fire service, yet the entire World Trade Center was constructed by this unorthodox method.
And I believe, Dr. Jennings, you agree with her on this? Or?
Well, clearly the trusses were a major problem in this incident, and the reliance on them, certainly in retrospect, is very problematic. When the building was constructed, I think that everyone can agree there was a certain amount of hubris on the part of the engineers and designers of that structure. People have to remember that when the World Trade Center was constructed, it wasn't even equipped with sprinkler systems. And frankly, it would have been all but impossible for the fire department to extinguish a conventional fire in those buildings. And so there are a lot of issues that need to be looked at long and hard.
And talking about a number of issues with you, Sally, over the last few days, one that came up was last Thursday night's meeting with a number of family members and top officials from the fire department, including the commissioner, Nicholas Scapetta.
Yes.
What were the main issues raised by people at that private meeting?
Well, there were several issues, but the main issue that I raised was that I challenged the fire commissioner and the heads of the 2 fire unions to fully support and endorse this federal investigation, and I was very delighted that they did that.
The department had told me they had endorsed that. Another topic I just want to bring up, R. John Schumo is not here tonight because he is at the media screening of this documentary that's going to air on CBS on Sunday.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I have mixed feelings about the documentary, but I certainly feel that a lot of feelings could have been saved if every firefighter family who was killed and every rescue person, if they had just been sent a video in advance. I think the families really wanted to have that token of respect, that token of concern. There were some people that were adamantly against it. There were other people who felt that they wanted to see their loved one for the last time. So there was a wide variety, but again, you know, communication can either, you know, create an empire or topple it, and I feel that, I think certainly that if everyone had received a video in advance, I was struck by the sincerity of those brothers, the French documentary filmmakers. They were very concerned, they were very sincere, and I don't really know what the upshot was. I know that there was a request for the relatives to have a private screening also.
And the fire department had said that they would also make this request.
That they would look into it, yes, yes.
As we wrap up, just want to get from you any more details on Wednesday's hearing. Anything else that our viewers should know about this hearing? I expect that it's going to go on for several hours.
I believe it was scheduled, you know, a minimum of 2 hours, but I would like to say it's an open hearing. I would invite and urge every single relative of anyone who was killed at the World Trade Center to join us, to come to Washington, and to attend the hearing of the Science Committee of the House of Representatives.
And quickly, what is your website that people can go to?
My website is www.herowtc.org and click on Skyscraper Safety, or they can email me at sallyregenhard@aol.com.
And it's R-E-G-E-N-H-A-R-D.
Right.
Great, Sally. Thank you very much.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Jennings, thank you very much too for joining us. Time for a break, but up next we're going to get you up to date on some of the stories we followed over the weekend relating to the attacks. As we go to break, we'd like to remember a Port Authority police officer lost in the Trade Center attacks. Welcome back. Time now to get you caught up on some of the stories we have followed over the weekend relating to September 11th and the war on terrorism. On Saturday, family members of Trade Center victims got together to help another cope with loss. Members of the World Trade Center United Family Group met on the campus of Seton Hall University in New Jersey to share their grief and their experiences in the wake of the terrorist attacks. More meetings are planned for the coming months, and they'll take place in both New Jersey and Manhattan. Also on Saturday, Mayor Bloomberg announced new plans for a temporary tribute to the victims of the attacks. A bronze sphere, which was damaged during the collapse, will be placed in Battery Park not in Battery Park City as originally planned, and that'll be unveiled tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And we are now told that the sphere will not only be unveiled tomorrow, but there will be a number of officials there. Overseas, the biggest battle so far in the war on terrorism began in eastern Afghanistan, pitting U.S. and Afghan forces against regrouping al-Qaeda and Taliban troops. That battle has killed 9 Americans thus far, and it's still going on tonight. Well, that famous flag, which was raised at the Trade Center site, is now raising controversy. 2 people have come forward insisting that the flag belongs to them. They say 3 firefighters took it from their yacht and raised it over the epicenter. Firefighters are now slated to meet with the 2 supposed owners to determine whether it is indeed their flag, and their motive, well, the 2 are seeking a tax write-off for donating it to the city. And it was NYPD versus FDNY on ice. As we told you last week here on New York Tonight, the police department and fire department hockey teams were to face off Saturday at Madison Square Garden to raise money for 2 charities to help 911 victims. The boys in blue skated off with the trophy. And a programming note for you, our New York 1 For You segment will return tomorrow night, and if you'd like us to look into a problem relating to the attacks, you can do one of 2 things. Call our hotline number, and that is 212-379-3599, but only call Monday through Friday between 11 in the morning and 1 o'clock. That's when our phone banks are staffed with trained volunteers from the New York section of the National Council of Jewish Women. Or you can send an email to us anytime at New York 1 For You at NY1.com. Now a reminder, if you lost your job or business because of the attacks, your time is running out to apply for help from some of the major charities. This Friday, March 8th, is the last day that you can apply for relief or help from the 911 United Services Group. That organization represents the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, Safe Horizon, and other aid agencies. If you qualify for assistance, you must schedule an appointment by Friday the 8th. The meeting does not have to take place by that point, but it must be scheduled by that date. You must sign up in person at the Disaster Assistance Service Center, and that is located at 141 Worth Street in Lower Manhattan, and it's open Monday through Friday from 9 to 5 and Saturday from 9 to 2. To find out if you qualify or for other questions, you can call Safe Horizons hotline, and that phone number is 866-689-HELP, H-E-L-P. Well, as we head into our second half hour, we're going to update you on today's top stories. Also ahead, we begin our Women's Week here at New York Tonight. We'll sit down with a member of the NYPD who helped with the search and recovery process. But as we go to break, here are some ways that you can help as the city rebuilds.
And now back to New York Tonight.
Welcome back. March is Women's History Month, and as part of our observance of all this week, New York 1 will pay tribute to some of the women heroes of September 11th. 6 months after the attacks, many people are just finding out that 3 women died in the line of duty, and that dozens answered the call on the 11th and continue to work tirelessly at the site. The Now Legal Defense and Education Fund is trying to make sure that some of those voices are heard, and the group produced this documentary, The Women of Ground Zero. Joining us tonight is one of the women it profiles, Lieutenant Terry Tobin from the NYPD. Thanks for joining us here.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons.
I have to ask you first, what was it like to become part of this documentary for you?
Well, the Now Legal Education and Defense Fund approached me. They were having a dinner in November, and they wanted to acknowledge the women who had responded on September 11th and helped in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks. So it was a very interesting experience for me to be a part of this project.
Tell us a little about your career first. How long have you been in the department?
I've been with the NYPD for 19 years.
19 years. Native New Yorker?
I am.
Native New Yorker.
Yes.
What borough?
I grew up in Queens.
In Queens. Why did you join the department?
Well, partially genetics. I'm one of 5 children. 4 of us out of the 5 followed in my father's footsteps, and my sister was let off the hook because she married an officer.
Okay, still in the family, in the
yes.
police family. Why did you personally, though, decide to become a police officer?
I think it's a wonderful career in public service, and I truly believe that part of my answer is that my father really enjoyed it, and to see someone who really enjoyed what they do for a living was a real plug in terms of a great advertisement for joining the NYPD.
Has your view of the department changed since September 11th?
To be honest with you, I think any organization's greatest asset are the people that work for it. And certainly in the NYPD, I think that the people who work, that I work with day in and day out, are the finest people in the world. It was something I knew on September 10th. I think September 11th gave the NYPD an opportunity to let the rest of the world see how wonderful the people are.
Where were you that morning?
I actually work in the Deputy Commissioner of Public Information's office. We deal a lot with the press and the media.
Hopefully it's a good relationship.
Absolutely, absolutely. So on that morning I was meeting with the Deputy Commissioner of Public Information. At the time we were reviewing the schedule, and someone came in and said, we have a report. Actually, I think it was a member of the media who called my office and said, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. So he sent me over, along with another Sergeant, Jerry Falcon, to the World Trade Center. And to be honest with you, we had no opportunity to see the video of the first plane going in. So when we arrived there, it was 8:54, and shortly thereafter, the second plane went in.
Where were you standing at that point when that happened?
Well, the department had mobilized us to Church and Vesey. We had responded to Western Liberty. So we were diagonal from where we needed to go. So we made our way around to the mobilization point. And it was at that time that the First Deputy Commissioner, Joe Dunn, grabbed me and told me to put on a helmet. So Jerry and I jumped on an emergency service truck and were able to get 2 very heavy emergency service helmets. And in the end, I think it is probably the reason why I'm sitting here today.
How close were you then for the next hour? Where were you? What were some of the things you had to do?
Well, I entered the North Tower, and that was pretty clear. And what was amazing was that every 5 feet there was an officer directing people to safety. And I crossed over into the South Tower, and there was a photographer taking shots of people coming down the escalator. And we were trying very diligently to get people out as quickly as we could. And on some level, even if it's subconscious, people tend to slow down when they see a camera. So I escorted them out of the frozen zone. And I had just walked underneath the overhang of the South Tower and asked an officer to just remove them, further down outside of the frozen zone. And I was parked right on the corner of Western Liberty. So I thought, well, it's going to be a long day. Maybe I should put my sneakers on. And I started to walk away. And then I heard a rumbling. And I actually was thinking of trains. That was the type of sound it was. And as I turned back and I went back towards the tower, people started running towards me, telling me that the tower was coming down. And I stopped and I looked up, and obviously it had begun to pancake down. And at that point, I was blown from the east side of West Street to the west side. And I landed on a patch of grass outside the financial center. And I only know that because it was a soft landing. The sprinkler system had just gone off. And shortly thereafter, a piece of cement went right through the helmet, split it in half, and got embedded in my skull.
Did you save that helmet? Do you still have it?
I didn't. It literally split in half right off my head.
What type of injuries did you suffer?
Well, obviously I had the head injury. I had also fractured my ankle. There were extremely loud explosions. I actually thought that we had begun to be bombed. But as it turns out, it was the gas tanks exploding of fire engines and ambulances, and even my own car blew up down there. So I have a significant hearing loss in my left ear. When I got up out of the rubble, I hooked up with a firefighter and 2 EMS workers who treated me. But then we heard people calling from the rubble who were alive. Well, yes, it wasn't too much thinking there when you heard people. It gave you some sense of where you should begin digging. And we were able to pull 3 people out from the rubble initially. And then people started running towards us again, telling us that the North Tower was coming down. So they were telling people to run towards the water. And I started to run, but I didn't realize that my ankle was fractured at that time. And I got hit really hard in my back. And I went right down to my knees. And I knew that I wasn't going to make it to the water, because when I turned around, that black cloud was coming towards me. So I got up, and there was an apartment building there. And I opened up the door, and I went inside, and there was a doorman's post. And then I walked further into the lobby, because I wanted to get away from the glass. And all the elevators were stopped on the first floor. But shortly thereafter, that black smoke started to come in through the elevator shafts. So I said, well, let me go into the stairwell. And I opened the door to the stairwell, and it was lined with the building's residents, who I don't know how long they had been there. So my fear was, as the smoke began to clear, was that other buildings were going to be affected by these towers coming down. So I told them to go out and stand in the lobby. And as I made my way out to the door that I had come in from, I saw 2 NYPD officers, and they told me that boats were coming to the slip and that we were going to be able to evacuate them.
Over to Jersey City
over
or
to
Hoboken.
Jersey. And at that point, they told me that there was a shard of glass that had gone through my blouse and embedded itself between my shoulder blades.
How often do you replay that day?
Right now, not that often. We've just been so busy in the aftermath of September 11th. So it hasn't been, I don't think that I have personally processed it all.
Final question, I'm almost out of time, but I want to ask, what role would you say women served on the front lines down there since September 11th? We should point that out.
In responding to the World Trade Center and being at Ground Zero since then, they're a very viable presence down at Ground Zero, and they continue to work, and I think they'll be part of the reconstruction phase also.
Great. Lieutenant Terry Tobin, thank you very much. I do want to point out that the video that you saw at the very beginning can be acquired if you log on to this website at www.nowdef.org. Lieutenant Tobin, thank you very much for joining us here tonight. Well, it is time for a break. Up next, we will respond to some of the emails that you've sent us, including the answer to whether you get money back from that air purifier you just bought. But as we go to break, September 11th, in your words.
Pray every day for the president, for the cabinet, for all the people that are involved in protecting us, the mayor. You know, politics have all gone out the window now, and it's just, you know, I'm worried about our country. I support it.
No, I mean, I'm not doing any extra safety precautions or anything. So, you know, what can you do? Life is very random. This is a random act of evil and violence. You can't protect yourself against that, so.
I realize that we definitely have to be more aware now, because I never thought anything like this could ever happen, and now that it has, I just realized that we're not completely protected. You know, even though we're in like a really strong, healthy country, that doesn't mean anything really.
Welcome back. Now it's time for our viewer mail segment, where we share some of the hundreds of emails we receive from our viewers each week. We begin tonight with a viewer named Orion, who is obviously venting his frustration with some of the major aid agencies. He writes about FEMA, the Red Cross, and the agency Acción, saying, and this is a quote, "If any of these or members thereof fell in front of me and reached for my hand, I would reply that they didn't fall within the guidelines and I would walk on by." Now an email on an issue we've addressed here on New York Tonight. CJ writes, quote, "I have heard that one of the government agencies will reimburse Manhattan residents for the purchase of HEPA air filters. Do you have any information about this?" Well, CJ, the short answer is you can be reimbursed, but only by calling the Federal Emergency Management Agency's registration hotline. That number is 1-800-462-9029. But FEMA says not everyone is eligible for a refund. FEMA also wants to warn you, if you've seen flyers like this one, which say you can get free air purifiers, the number on those flyers is not FEMA's number, and you should be aware of false promises. Moving on now to an email on a topic that still remains at the fore: what should eventually replace the towers? Bill writes, quote, Although nobody questions the need for a memorial, it's also important to restore the Twin Towers, perhaps offset from the footprints of the original buildings. The terrorists succeeded in wiping an American landmark off the map, and building nothing in its place will simply affirm their crime. And if you have a question, a comment, an idea for a story, or if you have memories of someone who died and you'd like to share them with us, we'll share them with our viewers. You can email us at ny1tonight@ny1.com or send us a letter at New York Tonight at New York 1, 75 9th Avenue on the 6th floor, New York, New York 10011. Well, you remember a couple of months ago we gave you the opportunity to weigh in on the future of the Trade Center site in our first New York Tonight online poll. We were flooded with responses, so now we're giving you the chance to speak your mind again. Right now on our website, NewYork1.com, NY1.com, you can weigh in on our second poll question. We're posing this to you in light of the story in Time magazine that New York was kept out of the loop about what initially was termed a credible threat. Our question: how much should New Yorkers know about terror threats? Should we be told about every possible threat, only the credible ones, or should we not be told at all? You can respond by going to our website at ny1.com, and we'll bring you the results a week from tonight on March 11th, which is the 6-month anniversary of the attacks. Well, it's time now for a break. As we close out the hour, Senator Chuck Schumer wants to bring the music back to New York to help the city's economy. We'll tell you about his plans when we return. But as we go to break, here's an event going on around town relating to the city's recovery. Now let's give you a look at some of the stories we will be following on Tuesday. At 9 o'clock, city officials will unveil the first of 2 temporary memorials. This one is the Sphere that we've been talking about, and it is now going to be placed in Battery Park. We'll bring you up to date on the looming deadline to apply for financial help from the United Services Group. And tomorrow night, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation's Transportation and Commuters Advisory Council will hold its first meeting downtown. Well, a state flag that once hung at the World Trade Center site will now fly at the Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid. It's a gift from Governor Pataki. Today, he honored some of the New York athletes that competed in the Salt Lake City Olympic Games in a special ceremony held at the state capitol. The governor says the state's athletes and the Lake Placid training site played key roles in helping the U.S. team bring home a record number of medals.
70% of the U.S. team trained at the Olympic facilities in Lake Placid at some point during their careers. 24 of the 34 medals that the United States won were won by athletes who trained at our ORDA facilities. 20 of the athletes on our team come from New York State.
Among those who gathered to receive the governor's praises, men's skeleton gold medalist Jimmy Shea, who is from Lake Placid. During the game, Shea wore a bracelet inscribed with the name of a firefighter who was killed on September 11th. Well, Senator Charles Schumer wants the music industry to show its support for the city post 9/11 by bringing the Grammy Awards back to New York next year. Today, Senator Schumer called on the National Academy of Recording Artists to hold the Grammys here in 2003. Schumer says it would pump millions of badly needed dollars into the local economy.
In the wake of September 11th, some of the world's biggest organizations who run some of the world's most important events have either scheduled their events right here in New York City or have made us a leading contender to host them.
The Grammys used to alternate between here and Los Angeles, but a dispute with former Mayor Giuliani led the organizers to pull up stakes a few years ago. Schumer says a decision on whether to bring the ceremony back is expected in June. And finally tonight, dozens of relatives of 9/11 victims are spending tonight at one of the city's fanciest restaurants. They were invited to the Alain Ducasse restaurant to watch as the French chef and owner presented a check for $150,000 to the Twin Towers Fund. Ducasse and the manager of a Paris hotel raised the money with a $550 per person dinner in Paris back in December.
It's just incredible that people from all over the world have been so touched not only by the tragedy that affected America and the terrorist attack, but by the heroes, the American heroes, our firefighters, our police officers, our ambulance drivers, who rushed into harm's way and gave their lives. And people all over the world have responded with kindness and generosity.
The Paris benefit also raised $50,000 for City Harvest and $25,000 for Meals on Wheels. Well, that is all the time we have for tonight. New York Close-Up is next, and joining host Sam Roberts is Nobel Prize-winning scientist Dr. James Watson. Join us tomorrow when John Schumo will be back at 8 o'clock for another live edition of New York Tonight. Good night.